Okay, are we on here, ready to go? Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much. It's great to see so many people here at a port meeting, and I hope that's a good thing. We'll find out. This is a special meeting of the Sacramento-Yolo Port District Commission, better known as the Port of West Sacramento Board of Directors. Today, March 13, and we'll start out with a Pledge of Allegiance, and we'll ask our Vice Chair, Oscar Villegas, to lead us in the pledge. Flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. All right, and first item on our agenda is opportunity for members of the public to present to us on matters not otherwise on the agenda. I don't have any cards for that. I assume there's no one here from the public speaking on items not otherwise on the agenda. So we'll move on to our consent agenda, items 2 through 5. Any member of the commission wish to comment or pull any of those items for further discussion? If not, I would take a motion to approve. Moved by Oscar, seconded by Mr. Johannesson. Okay, all in favor? Aye. All right, I hear no objections or abstention. It's unanimous. Item 6, this is a consideration of adoption of the Port Business Plan. And who is going to lead us off here?
Well, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, Aaron Laurel's going to do the presentation, but this port plan is a product of a 5-month effort. We came back to you in November 14th with the financial overview of the port's financial situation. As the first start of the business plan, we've had several discussions with the full commission, with the community. It's been a great effort from the staff perspective. Aaron's been joined by Rick Toff in writing this plan, but it was definitely a team effort. Mike Luca and the port manager played a big role in it, and our finance team led by Phil Wright, Natish, and Paul Bloomberg played a big role in being more transparent and kind of taking the onion and peeling it back piece by piece. We got great input from our rice customers in particular about looking at a different operating model. We got great input from labor. ILWU folks met with us a couple times in terms of the direction. Got great input from SSA, our operator out there. It was just, I think, a tremendous effort to really look at this asset, get very focused on how we could operate it in a more financial sustainable way. So the business plan before you tonight is going to focus on a new direction where we're proposing that the port staff shift to a different focus, and that would be, as a landlord, focus on the real estate assets and leave the operation of the North Terminal area to a professional company to run that on a day-to-day basis. So with that, I would like to introduce Aaron Laurel.
Thank you, Marty, and good evening, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Just wanted to revisit the original purpose of where we started off with this business plan back in late last year when we first started the workshops on this topic. What we're trying to do, obviously, is to achieve a financial sustainable position for the port that we've been lacking since the city took it over in 2006. And in doing so, achieve risk reduction for the city. There's a tremendous amount of financial risk on the city right now, given the port's financial situation. And then secondly, and equally importantly, maintaining the port's role as a infrastructure asset here in the region for goods movement. Just quickly to review where we've been, we started back in November with our first workshop on the port's financial status, and then worked through a background on the port. We did the cargo analysis and overview of revenue and the real estate of the port in December and January, and introduced the concepts behind some operating models that we were considering for going forward. We had the community forum that was well attended, and moving into late January, the last workshop. Then in February, you authorized us to release the request for interest for the North Terminal and other port assets. We got a very good response from that, and using that information, we were able to craft the business plan. And what the business plan is at this point, it's a culmination of all those workshops, putting together the background on the port, what got us here, the challenges that we're facing that we need to address through the recommendations in the plan. And then the recommendations is in part 2 of the plan. It's a set of 22 items. And I just emphasize that they aren't really to be seen as a menu. It's more a package deal where they all relate. We're recommending adoption of all 22 recommendations. And I'm going to step through what each of those are in a minute. We also included the appendices as background, the cargo analysis, the RFI, and information on Seaway. And you've seen this slide before. It was actually back in November. This just shows you the historical trend of the port. Obviously, expenditures over revenue, structural deficit that's been in place since the city took it over. And the other slide that you've already seen is another indicator of the problem we have. The port's use of its one-time revenue. Historically, when the city had redevelopment, the port and the redevelopment would take on mutual projects. It resulted in a sale of property that would help the port float its yearly cash flow. Also selling property to private entities. And really that's just not, as we pointed out in the business plan, just not a sustainable model for any business where you're taking your best long-term asset and using it to float your operations that are in a structural deficit position. Just quickly on port revenue, as you know, we get 2 forms of revenue from real estate and cargo. Now this is gross cargo revenue of $2 million, represents about 66% of the port's revenue, but on the real estate side, we're just north of $1 million, and that's about 34%. And what we did, if you remember, when we did an analysis of the revenue a while back, was really to make the point that the real estate revenue equals a higher ratio of net revenue when you factor out all the operating costs associated with running the port. And this is just a picture of what those costs are right now in the current fiscal year in operating and admin. And you factor in debt service, that 1.1 million number is actually a 5-year average from this fiscal year going forward, looking ahead the next 5 years. And this just represents what our approximate structural deficit is and has been, about $800,000 per year when you factor in debt service. And so that's really the number one reason for the need for the plan is to address that deficit, address the debt, get it into a manageable state. And the other problems the port has is just a simple inability to make investments because we're not well capitalized to be able to make investments that will lead to more revenue. We've tried some of that, and unfortunately it hasn't materialized into new revenue, so it's really time to look at that and say if we don't have the ability to do it on our own, we need a partner that can. The loss of redevelopment I already touched on, but that is a significant problem for the port now that there is no more backstop. And the city is not in a position to be able to fill the deficit. And finally, the business plan represents that opportunity to really implement a new model, to put the port in the position of a landlord that Marty mentioned and was really the goal of the Port Commission when we started out in 2006, and to reposition the port's best assets, its real estate assets, for development and for long-term revenue upside for the port. So getting into the recommendations, as you see in the plan, they're organized into categories. I already mentioned that they're really meant as a package deal. I did organize them by category instead of priority because of that. And I'm just going to go through each of them in terms of the categories through my presentation. And if you have any questions while I'm going through the recommendations, feel free to stop me along the way. First, on financial controls, even though we didn't prioritize the recommendations, I would prioritize this as our number one category of recommendations. The port really has some basic issues with its budget, trying to get costs under control and really well understood. So as we look at the new model, we know what our target is on putting revenue over costs. So the number one recommendation under this category is to implement administrative cost reductions. We talk about in the plan what those reductions represent. Mainly, though, I'll mention that the number one way to achieve those reductions is to move staff who are currently under the port fund to their original location within the Public Works Department. But acknowledging in doing that, there is an impact to the city, and the City Council, as part of the budget, will get more information on how the city can deal with that. But the point there is the port budget can no longer support that level of admin. And this is the place that we're looking first and foremost to reduce. The second recommendation has to do with debt retirement. The port had a legacy of debt, a bond issuance that predated the city's taking over control in 2006. That's the port's most significant debt service payment currently. We have an opportunity, given that we have some one-time funds that, plus a bond reserve that's available, to pay off that debt early. And we're recommending under this recommendation that we do that. The result of that would be a savings of about $200,000 in interest. You could put it off until it's finally due next year. The result of that would be not saving the interest. So that's why we're recommending it gets done this fiscal year. Third, having a capital maintenance reserve is something that's been lacking, mainly not because the port didn't want to have a maintenance reserve, but more because his budget just couldn't support it. And what we're trying to achieve here is under this new model to ensure enough of a buffer in revenue over cost to allow us to have a reserve, both for maintaining the facilities and maintaining the core infrastructure of the port that a master leasee, it would be difficult to ask a master leasee to take on, like maintaining the wharfs and piers, that kind of thing. And then finally, having just basic control measures in place, having a really coordinated effort with our finance department. We plan to initiate those measures immediately so that we'll probably start off with biweekly check-ins on what are costs looking like this month and what are revenues coming in at. It's really critical to get the port on a stable footing to have those controls and coordination in place. The next category has to do with the operating model. Most importantly, number 5 is we're recommending that we negotiate a master lease agreement for the North Terminal cargo facilities. I'll show in a minute on a map what those facilities would entail. But this is fundamentally the most important recommendation of the plan, putting the port in the position of a landlord, having a master leasee take over most of the operation costs that are such a burden to the port right now, and paying us a reliable lease payment, a fixed amount that can be counted on every year. We're not subject to the whims of the cargo market in anticipating our revenue. And you would add that to your real estate revenue and have a predictable amount per year. Secondarily, if that doesn't work, we had this as an option in the modern operating model analysis that we did. We could negotiate leases for the individual cargo facilities, like the bulk rice facility, the bulk area, some of the other facilities at the port. The disadvantage of that is while the port would be a landlord, it's still responsible for the overall management of the North Terminal property. And then lastly, retaining the most productive assets and the highest potential assets, which is our current leases and our vacant real estate properties. Those are currently your highest net revenue in terms of what port currently receives, and also its longest term upside in terms of new revenue. That would include the properties at the North Terminal that are undeveloped and Seaway. And on this map, this just illustrates what I was talking about in terms of the lease area. The white dotted line is really that ideal lease area where you're only dealing with the cargo facilities. Ideally, a master lease would take over those facilities, operate the cargo business there. The port would continue to receive rent from the Two Rivers facility, the other properties that are currently leased outside of that footprint, and most importantly, retain the development rights and control the destiny of the properties that are shaded in the green. So under real estate, related to what I just said, promoting the lease and sale and development of those properties, those North Terminal properties that are shown here in yellow, it's something that will take some proactive measures to implement. We could sit and wait for the market to respond, or we could put together plans for improving infrastructure, aggressively marketing the properties, looking at potential uses that would include really any industrial use at those sites, really expanding the scope of what could be possible there and taking proactive measures to make it happen. Number 9 has to do with Seaway, and it's kind of the same idea with Seaway. The task is much larger here, obviously, because you're dealing with over 270 acres of developable property with very little infrastructure in place. But in order to push the development of that property, we really need to do some internal due diligence and make sure that the entitlements make sense for what we have them today, come up with strategies to do infrastructure to help offset some of the total development costs of making development possible there, and also thinking about a strategy for involving a master developer, joint partner potentially. And what you'll probably see out of this, at least if the plan's adopted, a follow-up to this recommendation would be some sort of RFP scenario where we solicit private developers for potential joint development. Oops. And then some of these other recommendations on real estate are fairly basic. First of all, a lease schedule is something that is pretty fundamental for a landlord, but right now, admittedly, it isn't in the best shape in terms of making sure that we have a good handle on when our leases expire. And the point there is that if we know a lease is set to expire in a couple of years, we should be proactive about trying to make sure that it gets extended to preserve that revenue. So having a schedule is important. Number 11, I just wanted to point out that the port, for a long time, its relationship with the city and the properties that the city and redevelopment agency had, it wasn't the most coordinated in terms of overall, since we are working for the greater good of the city and economic benefit to the city. Also, a comprehensive strategy for all of the properties makes sense when you're looking at a property like Stonelock that's under the redevelopment agency's control. It really should be looked in the context of Seaway, the development that could potentially happen there, and the infrastructure that's required to make that development happen should be coordinated. And that's the point on that recommendation. Number 12 is really making sure that the port is coordinated with what the city is doing on implementing its community investment plan, hopefully bringing back some form of tax increment financing to help with infrastructure. We want to make sure that we've identified all the port's infrastructure needs to make sure that those get incorporated into whatever the city does in terms of its plan for whatever new tools will come about. And then finally, we've mentioned this before about the Delta lands, Prospect and Decker Island, and the either side of the channel going down to Rio Vista. There's potential there for habitat mitigation. It's a long development process, kind of a niche industry, but there is that potential, and at least the port should explore that potential in the absence of using those properties for what we originally intended, which was for the channel deepening project for dredge spoils. If that project is not proceeding as an alternative, we should be looking at how we can make those properties productive in terms of real estate revenue. On cargo, we want to make sure that the transition to a master leasee doesn't disrupt our core business. The table that you see in front of you there really points out that issue. 93% of the port's cargo right now is rice. So naturally, you wouldn't want to do anything in the transition to a master leasee that would disrupt that. And conversely, the master leasee shouldn't either. But it's important to point out that right now we don't have a diverse cargo base, and we really need to do what we can to support the continuance of our core commodity, which is the rice. The Marine Highway Project, there are things that the port can do to try to bring more resources to that project. The most basic one is trying to find money for barges, the equipment, and also monitoring what's going on in Stockton with their side of the project, and basically getting it ready for when it is marketable and feasible, that we're ready to move on it. And then number 16, the most important thing here going forward immediately is maintenance dredging. While channel deepening may be on hold because we don't have the federal share, we want to make sure that we maintain the Army Corps' current role of dredging the channel at its current depth. If that were to change, it would be really not just detrimental, but potentially could be the end of current operations and not having the channel at its current depth. And on other revenue, the port, as you know, has a foreign trade zone. It's been sort of underutilized in terms of marketing. The port just hasn't had the capacity to go out and try to get more interest in that program. But we see the opportunity to partner with an outside entity, and there are plenty in the region just in terms of the, for instance, the World Trade Center is a potential partner there. There's a lot of different entities that could make sense. So the point there is that we should go out and try to find a partner, give them a financial incentive to work on that program with us, and hopefully expand the revenue. And also, the last point here is the port purchased air credits that was associated with mineral shipping a while back. Given that we are going to be out of the cargo business, we don't need those air credits, but they do have a secondary market value, so we should try to recoup our initial investment from those. The governance agreement we talked about one of the previous meetings. There are definitely provisions in the governance agreement that could be obstacles to certain things we'd like to do with Seaway, certain problematic provisions that would contemplate us having to sell the property by a certain date. They just don't make sense now, given what's happened. They don't have relevance anymore. And so what we're recommending is that at a staff level, we go through the governance agreement with a fine-tooth comb and identify all those provisions. And at the commission level, under number 20, we propose solutions to those issues, and that could range from amendments to the agreement or something completely different. And lastly, on community relations, it's obviously an important point for the port to maintain good public relations, and one of the ways we do that right now is through public access to Lake Washington. We have the boat clubs out there, and we should be exploring ways to preserve what we have now, but also expand it to create new opportunities. And then lastly, the port's front door along Industrial Boulevard and some of its existing facilities obviously aren't in the best shape. So what we'd like to do here is come up with a short-term plan, modest improvements. We're not talking about a large dollar figure, but things that we can identify to improve the port's general appearance from that front door. Could be as simple as paint or tearing down a building that isn't used anymore, like the old admin building, or we've talked about ideas like lighting, things like that. So we'd like to come up with a plan to implement some of those that again wouldn't cost a lot of money, but would improve the appearance and hopefully, in doing so, the public perception and marketability of the port. So in terms of next steps, I'll point back to number 5. That's really the most important recommendation going forward immediately, is to use the responses that we received from the RFI and get into really serious lease agreement negotiations with the master leasee. The goal here is that we have a new model implemented by July 1st. So in order to get there, we need to move quickly. And it's not just on number 5, it's on the other recommendations as well. So our plan would be 1 through 22. There are all immediate steps that need to be taken on each of those recommendations. If the plan's adopted tonight, we'll start that tomorrow. And so that's how I'll close and take questions at this time.
Thank you. And I want to say at the outset that you and Rick and the others that have worked so hard on this really do appreciate it. This is kind of a watershed time for the port and for the community, and I personally appreciate the time and energy and the sleepless nights that you guys put into this to get us to the stage. I really do thank you for that.
Thank you.
And now we're going to tear it apart.
Go ahead.
I'm just kidding. So let's start with some questions. Mark?
Aaron, just a couple of preliminary points. On the foreign trade zone, are you also looking at non-contiguous zones within the West Sacramento?
Right. The foreign trade zone allows you to go anywhere within the area that it covers. And right now we have agreements that span, I believe there's a company in Roseville that takes advantage of it. I think there might be one in town. But yes, we're looking outside just West Sacramento for that. And that's why we're looking to involve a regional partner. Mm-hmm. Our resources are sort of constrained here. We have staff that do the type of work that would entail, but we're really focused on getting companies to West Sac and companies that are already here. What we see in the benefit of a regional partner could be to expand that marketing territory using existing connections that they already have to identify businesses that could take advantage of it, and in doing so, take a cut of the yearly revenue from it.
Yeah, I've just heard a number of businesses in the Southport area, the light industrial, that this would be a huge benefit to be able to do assembly in a foreign trade zone and defer the tariffs until the product is actually released from. I would assume that includes the bonded warehouses and all the things that go around foreign trade zones.
Right. So that's really the nature of the recommendation, is to not just expand it to what we aren't doing here in West Sac, but also companies that might not know about it. It's not really a well-known option, so we want to make sure that we get the word out across the region.
Great, thanks.
Before we go any more questions, I apologize. I did have two, and we'll come back
Okay.
to questions from the commission and in the dialogue, I suspect, about the next steps that we may wish to take. But I do have two cards here, and as you know, we've got practice here filling out a card in order to speak. So I'll call the first one up, Tim Campbell from ILW Local 18. Thank you, Tim. Good to see you again.
Nice to see you, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. Tim Campbell, President, ILW Local 18. As a response to the new North Terminal suggested geographical map, during your considerations of the new business plan or plans, we, the ILW, have a past practice of set a solid precedence of our jurisdiction at the North Terminal, and also has a preservation of work agreement that is still active and is to be observed through all four parties that have mutually negotiated these terms, and to be put into the minutes that the ILW has made effort in good faith to further the deadline date. This is an agreement that we can run the clock out on. Mr. Cabalden knows the preservation well. We know the preservation well, and we're concerned about it. That geographical map does not coincide with our map, and I understand you're doing leases and things are changing around, but the labor force out there is still to be recognized in those maps, no matter how you chop the map up. You know, so the ILW is out there, and our preservation is active and strong, and I want that in the minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The other card I have is from Alex Uros. Alex, you here tonight? Oh, you in the back? Sure. How you doing? Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, Chairman McGowan, Mayor Cabalden, members of the board, City Manager Tuttle, Mr. Toft. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak. I feel a little bit odd speaking to all these folks with my back to them, but
You're addressing the commission.
I'm
today.
addressing the commission. So I just wanted to introduce our company as an interested party and as with our interest to be a master lessee for the city and for the Port of West Sacramento. We're a private company. The Bro Group is a private international investment company, operations management company. We've been around for about 40 years, investing in asset-based companies, operating asset-based companies, and in very synergistic, very long-term businesses. We currently own companies in real estate, transportation, and energy, and we've built a multi-billion-dollar enterprise today with about 1,500 people throughout North America doing the things that we do. Our real estate organization, just really briefly, is a commercial real estate company that owns and operates real estate, advises on real estate, about 24 million square feet of properties throughout the United States. Much of that is industrial real estate. And we have a very successful track record of not only investment in real estate, but specifically turning around very distressed properties, about over $1 billion of distressed properties that we've turned around. Our transportation group goes under the name of Omnitrax. Omnitrax is one of the largest private transportation management companies in North America. We own railroads, we own ports and operate in various ports throughout the United States and Canada. We have a terminal business, and we also have an industrial development group. And what our industrial development group, and this is fairly relevant here as well, what our industrial development group does is work with industries to attract them to the assets, give them access to the national rail network, waterways, and create opportunities for infrastructure investment, logistics, infrastructure, and so forth. All the while, what we are creating in the communities that we operate in and the communities and the assets that we operate there is jobs, local investment, and tax base. We leverage the relationships that we have throughout our network of businesses, throughout our network of operations. We leverage our expertise, and we leverage our relationships and bring our capital to the table for our own in order to carry out that activity. In short, we're a catalyst for growth for all of the communities that we operate in. And we've been consistently recognized for that. We've been consistently recognized for our economic development capabilities, the ways we work with communities, the successful attraction of businesses, for our safety record. Our people are some of the safest operators in the railroad industry, consistently get recognized for Safety Person of the Year, Safety Professional of the Year in the railroad industry. Very impressed by those guys. They just are great at what they do. And by our railroad partners, Class 1 railroads that we deliver traffic to, originate traffic for, create business for. So what we're here to tell you is that we're very interested in master leasing the port and bringing our capabilities and our expertise here. What our value proposition is to you is that we create economic vitality. Our success is based on the proactive pursuit of business. That is what we do.
I'm actually ask you to wrap it up. We have about a 3-minute limit here. Sorry about that.
Okay, very good. So what we do is we spend our time to understand the regional economy that we operate in. We spend time to leverage the broad spectrum of relationships we have, develop the supply chain solutions, invest ourselves in the outcomes that we are of our efforts. And one thing to really kind of top all of this off for you and make it relevant for you is that we're strong believers that past performance is an indicator of future results. For that purpose and to demonstrate that, we have began 2 projects that we'd like to bring to the Port of West Sacramento, multi-commodity terminal operations, over $30 million of investment, and that will create a lot of jobs, a lot of investment, a lot of cargo activity, and one last comment to make, particularly having spoken with some of the stakeholders here. There's no intention on our part to turn over contractors and labor and all of those sort of things. That's not what we do. We're interested in being a part of the community, being a part of your community, bringing the full panoply of our capabilities, our expertise, our relationships, our customers, and move freight through the community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for coming today and speaking. Okay, now we'll go back. Aaron, you're back on the hot seat. And I think, Mark, did you have some other questions at this point? Anybody? Bill, questions, comments, observations?
No, I would just comment that I thought your proposal was done very well. You and your staff and yourself, you're really to be commended. You sort of laid it out pretty well. And I mean, I think that some of the same old themes that we've had in the past, they need to be tweaked. And, you know, I mean, there are things I think that the port is heading into that could be very, very beneficial. And, you know, I'm really interested in the development of a diverse cargo type. If we can, I mean, I know we've all said it before, but you know, it's something that I think would really help the port. The other one, of course, is deepening. We need some partners. We need some additional influence and wherever it can be as far as deepening go. And then, of course, is the Green Highway. I mean, it's something that's important to especially this Port Commission. I mean, this Port Commission has talked about it for a long time, and it's something that is very important. And so I really liked your 21-point program. I thought, or how many points it was, but I thought it was very, very enlightening, and if we could put all of those together and put them together correctly, I think we would finally have a successfully financial port. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would echo what was previously said, Aaron. You guys did, you and Rick, and obviously the Port CO did a wonderful job of putting this together. It's very easy to understand. It seems like it's a very clear path, obviously daunting, but very clear in terms of what you're proposing. I actually wanted to comment on some of the public testimony that we just received. The speaker that represents Bro, I mean, that sort of enthusiasm and excitement is very appealing. I mean, I think it's an interesting concept, that the notion that there's a lot of potential here is, I think, what we all knew, we all hoped for. But again, I think we've come to the realization our entity, this organization, our city, our port governance structure, it just doesn't work. This model, albeit we gave it the best shot, it's clear we're not the best ones. So I think you've outlined a series of steps that we need to take that, as you said, need to kind of go as a package deal, but I think you make a lot of sense in terms of how you laid it out, and it's clear the master lease component is a critical component in moving forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The staff has done a tremendous amount of work here and very high quality stuff, and all the stakeholders that have participated in the process too have taken it seriously. This is extraordinarily serious. I mean, all of us in one way or another were involved the last time we had a clear set of recommendations about how to proceed that was going to chart a path towards a sustainable port that would be an engine of economic activity and development in the agricultural and industrial and technology sectors in the Sacramento region, which didn't happen. All right, and in fact, we failed miserably. I think I'm not going to. I won't. I gave the full 25-minute mea culpa last time about how badly we have done on this before, in our attempts to try to solve the workaround. And so I only mention that because for me it's an important lens to apply a heavy degree of skepticism to our own claims, all of us in this port bubble, around what we say and think we're going to be able to do tomorrow, the next step, because we haven't delivered it. And it's not for lack of trying. It's not because we don't work hard. It's not because we're not competent. It's a lot of things have happened, but we have not gotten it right year after year after year after year after year. And these are and we've got to be. We can't afford not to succeed at whatever path we go down this time. It's just not. There's no more blood to get out of the turnip. So we are at a situation where if we don't have an effective strategy that will work for sure, then we have a port that there's no other option than closure, and that's the reality that we're facing. So for that, and within that context, I think this plan is sensible, but it's how we then accomplish it that becomes the critical piece. Because we've had plans before, and we've had plans that were all the way to actual projects, a dozen of them that we can all take off, that had financing, had approvals, had Superior Court judgments. I mean, we had a whole range of milestones, and not a single one of them is in the ground, and not a single dollar of revenue has come in from them in order to sustain the port's basic operations. And so, as we look at this, sustainability is a key part of how we proceed, and there are two dimensions to it, and I think to some extent they're trade-offs, and the various folks who've talked about this in our stakeholder community have really framed it in this way, which I think is right, which is that there are, we can focus entirely on short-term sustainability because it's a critical need and it has to get dealt with, right? Our debt payments, our other obligations, the annual operating deficit that has been going on for years, those all must be dealt with. So short-term sustainability is really critical. That has to have near-term certainty because there's no backstops. And so one essential element of however this business plan gets translated into a master lease or whatever is that there be real near-term absolute certainty for the port district, because the port has no other alternatives. The city is not going to continue to appropriate funds out of its general fund to sustain the port. So whatever the arrangement is that accomplishes this plan has to provide that level of meaningful budgetary certainty for the near term, so we get out of the position where we're bleeding money and we have debt that we can't pay off. But at the same time, long-term sustainability is something entirely different, which is, we all know this because all of us in this room have made the case to the federal government, look, if you don't do the deepening, our port is in dire straits. We haven't said give us the money for the deepening because it would be a nice bell and whistle to put on the port, but because we have believed, at least, I think, I've believed it when I've said it to the Senate and the White House and the Corps of Engineers, we have believed that the deepening is essential for the port's long-term viability. And not long-term like 50 years from now, but long-term like, 8 years from now. It's essential. If that's the case, then however we operationalize the business plan, it has to have a real path towards getting to deepening. And it cannot be. The one thing I'm absolutely certain of, we've all been to Washington a million times, it cannot be we're going to go lobby and ask them for the money from Congress. If that's the plan for deepening, then let's close tomorrow, because that is not a plan. There is no pot of money available. Most of the ports that are getting deepened around the rest of the country are doing so through public-private partnerships now, with some other amount of federal participation to be sure, but not driven by a 90% or an 80% federal cost share. And so if our business plan does not contemplate that, and said, then we're dead in the water. And so I think on that part of the business plan recommendation, in number 16, we need to rework the way that we've articulated what our plan is. Our plan isn't to continue advocacy for federal participation. Yes, that's a component of it, but if our plan isn't to deepen the channel, and we don't have a real tangible, hard plan for deepening the channel, then we're setting ourselves up for midterm failure. We might last for another 5 years through the near-term certainty issues that we're talking about, but we can't wait for a deeper channel to fall out of the sky. And in my view, the way that we've worded 16, it puts it all in the federal basket, and that's not a viable strategy. Second is the Marine Highway, which we applied for the Tiger funds on the presumption that the Marine Highway would be a significant generator of business and income to the port, and that it would help to bolster the core business of the port by doing so. And we won a massive federal competition to do that. The Secretary of Transportation came here. The Secretary of Agriculture came here. I can't think of any other city of our size in the state that's had 2 cabinet secretaries visit. Oh, and Senator Boxer came here. We've had a high degree of federal participation to make this project happen. We must accomplish it. We have to. And so again, in 15, I think we have here that our objective is to facilitate the implementation of the Marine Highway. The commitment that we have made to this point is that we're going to do the Marine Highway. We're not facilitate the implementation. Almost sounds like somebody else is going to do it, or it's just going to happen, and we'll be there to cheer it on. It has to be much more aggressive than that. That has to be a core part of our plan. And so those kinds of elements of long-term sustainability really reflect that we're not writing a business plan for 2006. This is not an update of the terminal operator agreement that we did in 2006. It is already a totally different world in the world of ports. I mean, almost everything about ports has changed in that period. Financing, the global shipping market, the Panama Canal, the relative competitiveness of rail and trucks. I mean, the whole market's different, and it's going to keep getting that way. And if our business plan doesn't anticipate that, if all we do is try to figure out how do we keep going what we have been doing without a deficit, we're setting ourselves up for being back in this position in a couple of years. And so as we move forward on implementing the plan, we have to have a clear eye towards long-term sustainability. Now, the reason why I describe it as a challenge is that the long-term sustainability requires a lot of passing, and the short-term sustainability is a lot of running. I mean, we just don't want to lose. We just don't want to lose any ground on the short-term sustainability and like inch our way towards not having a deficit. But the long-term stuff is not like that. And so, as we think about how we move forward on this, and it's, I think, it's why I was excited too, like Mr. Villegas, about, the enthusiasm for the future of the port, achieving the right balance between being aggressive and innovative and entrepreneurial and pushing the envelope and doing whatever it takes to get the big stuff done, balanced with, and we have to get total certainty that in the short term we're not going to be operating in deficit with a severe debt, or it's going to be one of our key challenges for us, for staff, and for whatever partners that we work with on the project. So I think that's one of the key policy directions around this. And so on 15 and 16, I think we need stronger. We do need stronger language. Similarly, on the governance agreement, I think what we ought to be working towards is just repealing it. There's no need for the governance agreement. So tweaking the agreement was there under the theory that the worry that Sacramento City and county had that we were doing this whole governance transition because there was this, hidden treasure underneath the port, that once the city of West Sacramento got its paws on the port, then suddenly the next day we'd say, hey, we've discovered, or we've just found a buyer or a lease for $1 billion for something in the port. We're in the money now. And so they wanted an agreement to make sure that that they were protected against that, and that they would share in the upside. It's clear now that that's not the case. And so I think what we ought to be going right now, while we're in this phase of the process, to Sacramento County and to Yolo County as well, and to Sacramento City, and saying the need for this agreement's gone, and having the agreement there is an obstacle to the 23 things that we have to do at the Port Commission, just to make sure that we have a viable port going forward. So I think that set of recommendations also ought to be a bit stronger on that side. I like that you've narrowed the footprint. I think that the notion of focusing on the smallest feasible footprint of what we might be looking at in terms of our public-private partnership makes a lot of sense for a lot of reasons, at least in the near term. We've been open to a larger real estate footprint than what you're talking about in this presentation, but I think it does make sense. I think in general terms, the Appendix A that we had in the RFI, was it RFI or RFP? In the RFI, that appendix ought to be a clear. You ought to have that pinned on your wall during the master lease discussions, because it lays out what we said we were going to judge them by, and we ought to. And so that includes all the financial terms, right, which are really critical for all the reasons that I just said in terms of the revenue stability and the debt and the deficit and all of that, but and the long-term sustainability issues, but also the cargo, both what kinds of cargo, who controls it, under what terms, and for what purposes, and then importantly, and what's not really is economic jobs and economic development. Jobs both at the port, for the reasons that were described earlier this evening, and creating jobs and creating businesses and creating business growth in our community. So a port that only serves what it has been serving has some value, but a port that does what this port has been doing and helps to facilitate the creation or expansion of companies here in West Sacramento and in the region that's a better one. And so it ought to be reflected that way as we're looking at potential master lease partners and master lease terms, that matters. The extent to which we are creating economic prosperity for our citizens, in addition to just making this bubble of a port work on its own terms. So I do think as we go through the negotiations, paying attention to that dimension does matter. And then obviously, as I said, we got in this business because of potential conflicts around incompatibility of cargo. And both types of cargo, but also cargo operations, as I think we've learned with rail issues and other sorts of things. And so as we move forward with the business plan, and we look at other ways of organizing who is recruiting and overseeing and managing the cargo choices, that we need to make sure that core purpose for the West Sacramento community to have governance responsibility over the port be infused in those agreements. We need to figure out exactly how to assure that, be able to continue to assure the neighborhoods and other businesses in the community that we will have compatible uses, while at the same time having a economically viable port. I mean, knowing that we cannot have a port that only ships in and out bunnies and flowers. That we need a broader economic impact here as well. So I think this is it's a great step. The recommendations are all correct, but they won't matter if we don't implement them with a lot of aggressiveness. And I've said before, I think all of us have fallen on our feet a little bit in the last since we took over. We started with a good plan, and I've had some challenging things to say about our terminal operator. And I know we're looking at a proposal from them as well, that we really need. That we cannot repeat what we have, just doing what we have been doing with an extra check. With an annual payment to keep doing what we have doing. I don't want to be in this position for my entire life of every other year. Oh, the port's bankrupt again. It can't be like that. We have to solve this now, while we have both the right plan and a set of potential partners that could really make this work.
Comments at this point? Yes, Mark. Pardon? I was going to say something. Go right ahead. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, just to reiterate what the mayor has said, this does a couple things for us. It first of all reduces the city's exposure, the financial exposure, and I know we're kind of a little bit wearing both hats up here, but it's a big issue to cities now, and particularly with the demise of redevelopment and some of the other issues we're finding. So this helps create financial stability not only for the city but for the port as well. And I think importantly, it puts the burden on the market, really, on port expansion. It puts the incentives where the incentives should be to help us develop the cargoes. I don't think anybody in West Sacramento is really an expert that it really takes to do something like that, to go to China or wherever you need to go to be able to get the cargoes in here that we need. And the last thing that it does is it really maintains the infrastructure of the channel. We had a fight, this was 10 years ago or something, on whether or not the port should even survive, and I know our friends at Labor were helping us with that, and so the port was able to survive, and now it turns out it is a part of the essential infrastructure for the region, particularly now that we're part of the Green Highway program. But as we move into implementation, I'd like to also reiterate our goals here are really to have a port that's operating in the midst of a city. So we have to, whoever the operator is going to be, would have to understand that there are sensitivities in terms of what can happen and not. And we are going to discuss the kind of cargo and things of that nature. But I think it's important that we do continue to focus on barging. We have a reputation at stake, so we need to have some commitment, I think, by whoever's going to take this over on what is the plan on barging. How are we going to move that forward? And the other is the port deepening, because we're at 30 feet. If we go to 35, it's what 80% of the world's fleet can come here, and that greatly expands. We've been pursuing this for years, and it's going to take a sustained effort to do that. So, I'm going to be looking for that type of thing in terms of how you're negotiating this. And also, that whoever the operators recognizes the friends that have helped, labor friends that have helped move this forward in the past, lobbying efforts and that sort of thing in terms of creating an environment where we can actually help sustain the jobs in the community. So, but anyway, it was a good job. I think you hit all the right buttons. In terms of what I wanted to see in a plan. This is an iteration that we've seen over the course of months, the culmination of your work, so good job.
Thank you.
Thank you. Aaron, yes, we're going to see if we can take action here in a moment, but I would pick up on the Commissioner Cabalden's suggestion here, request, that on both 15 and 16, that we just turn those into affirmatives. Instead of facilitating the implementation of the Marine Highway project. I mean, use whatever language you want to, but basically say, implement the Marine Highway.
And on 16, if I heard right, an addition of a reference to public-private partnership, that sort of thing.
How you get there, for me, is less important than us. Our business plan should be to deepen the Deepwater Channel. And I think you can put that in there as an example of a way to accomplish that. I think it gets to be self-evident that reliance on the federal government to fully fund or substantially fund the deepening is not. It means you're not going to accomplish your goal. So, it's kind of hard to say this is my goal, provided I can do it this way, knowing we can't do it that way. So the goal becomes illusory. So let's just be bold about that and say we're going to deepen the channel. However, that has to be done, and then part of your job is to figure out how to do that. So those are the only two quibbles I have with the wordsmithing or the perhaps policy reconstruction on those two, and hopefully there's concurrence, I think.
If I could jump in there on 19 and 20, the governance agreement, would it be more appropriate to collapse that into one recommendation to repeal the agreement, or do we want to keep it as identify the problems and then?
I personally think our first shot ought to be to try to just have the agreement, rescinded by its own, by agreement of the parties. That us spending the time picking out the 5 most problematic positions and provisions, and then their attorneys and finance directors go through those 5. It's not worth it to anybody. because the agreement's not providing us any benefit, it's not providing them any benefit. So we just and it's not going to. I mean, there's none of this anticipates, significant windfalls of dollars one way or the other. So I think we ought, the goal ought to be simpler and cheaper, which is just to,
Okay.
And then if they're not open to that, if they're open to some modifications, then we proceed down that path.
Okay, I think we can collapse it into one recommendation then, based on the feedback. So
Good.
if you're comfortable with that.
All right, and I don't have much else to add. I certainly concur. And I think Commissioner Cabaldon really articulates the challenge that we have, because there is a strong survival necessity for short-term relief here from debt and get some revenues in. There's no question about that. But we do need to be mindful of. We need to force ourselves to be a little more aggressive about the big picture, because what's that port going to look like in 15, 20, 25 years from now, and we should be able to articulate that today and then drive for that vision, which I think is what we're trying to do. We're the master. This may be the last time we do a significant plan like this. Hopefully, it's the last time we do a plan like this for many years. We can implement, continue to go back and draw on this one as our motivation and our direction. So, again, with those modifications that we just talked about, unless there's another. I had one. This is really not that big of a deal in some ways, but it's kind of a quibble I've had having been around here for a while. But we want to approve the public access and the recreational opportunities. I'm kind of, since we're no longer a regional, that is Sacramento County facility, we're a local facility. Not today, you got other things more important to do, but someday I wouldn't mind revisiting why we have non-district residents using our public access.
Maybe after we repeal that agreement. Maybe after we get rid of that agreement.
Yeah, we'll wait and see. I'm saying down the line. Okay. I'm sending a signal. Because I got some homeboys that can't get into one club because there's too many guys from Carmichael. So we got to fix that someday. All right.
Can I just
yes,
two pieces of two recommendations in terms of the underlying text, the how and the why. On this same one, on the recreation piece, the recommendation itself makes sense to me. The text underneath, I think, is too limiting. I mean, it basically says we're going to achieve this by removing abandoned vessels, and I don't think that's what you're intending. I think that's an example, maybe a first step, but as a long-term plan for improving public access and recreational opportunities, which has been a key priority of the communities for years. I think that's too limiting, and so you just have. I think you have it by continuing to seek funding to remove abandoned vessels, and I think that's too constraining. So as you take a look, as you end up doing some editing work, that would be an area I would encourage you to make that just an example of things that we might do otherwise. And then on 12. The coordination with the Community Investment Program. The port, I don't think, has been directly engaged in the legislative component of this, but we ought to say that, that the port would be advantaged if we were to achieve, the legislative changes necessary on IFDs or whatever financing mechanisms in partnership with the city.
Right, and we do plan to make that part of the message as we talk to legislators. This session is to emphasize how projects like Seaway would gain if we had an IFD.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that being from the port, in addition to and in collaboration with from the city.
Okay.
I think would be helpful. But the top line recommendations is right on target. I would just add that to the components under 12.
All right, and I think it's fair to say that what we're let's see if we got the concurrence, and we've talked a lot about what a great job you did, and we've made some minor adjustments to it. And so let's see what level of support that we have. Are we prepared to take action, ladies and gentlemen? Anybody?
I'll move adoption of the port business plan with the modifications that we've identified.
And I'll second that.
Move and second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition, abstention? I hear none. It's unanimous. I assume then, as part of that action, we are then authorizing you to go forward with, I guess, principally negotiations that are called for, as in 5, negotiating a master lease, and the North Terminal, and 9, working on a master development strategy for Seaway properties. Those obviously are I just want to call out for everybody, because that's what some of the folks are here to hear tonight to hear about, and you'll be moving forward then in trying to develop the agreements that'll perfect then our port business plan.
Right.
All right. Thank you very much, and again, really a good job.
Thanks.
I'm impressed. What else do we got here today? Any other business? I got to take a look here. Any reports from commissioners? No. Any report from the CEO? No. Any report from the port? Did you have something else?
Well, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, we talked about the next meeting, which is currently scheduled for April 3rd, to be shifted to April 10th to accommodate a council meeting that's later that day, which was moved to the 10th to accommodate the cap-to-cap trip. So we would propose that the next commission meeting be shifted from April 3rd to the 10th. That gives us another week to update you on some of the action measures that were outlined in the plan.
Okay with everybody? We all got the memo. I got it in my book already. So, all right. So then, for anyone who's interested, and would you let that guy from the Comstocks know about this?
Yeah, he gets electronic notification of the meetings.
God bless you.
Okay.
Yeah. Otherwise, you'll say bad stuff about me. So the next meeting we have is on April 10, a key. All right. If there's nothing further to come before us, we are adjourned. Thank you.